Thank you for having me. And hola, bienvenidos a todas y todos.
Great. Sí, está bien, buen español.
Yo estoy aprendiendo.
Okay, Andre, please, if you want to introduce Sebastian a little bit in your words, si quieres darle pase a Sebastian, por favor,
Sí, claro.
a tu manera.
Bonjour, bonsoir, Sebastián, bonsoir.
Bonsoir.
La presentación de Sebastián a todos va a ser en inglés, va a ser una lengua intermedia para que llegue a muchísimas más personas. Como les dije, él es de Francia, pero el día de hoy nos va a hacer una presentación en inglés y ya hemos venido compartiendo conocimiento en inglés con muchos invitados internacionales, así que espero que no sea nuevo. Sebastián es un developer advocate de AWS en Francia, como les dije, específicamente en París, y desarrolla mucho el conocimiento dentro de la comunidad en Francia. Es muy activo generando contenido, así que lo pueden buscar en sus redes sociales. Yo desde que lo conocí empecé a buscar su nombre y tiene muchísimo contenido desarrollado, así que a todas las personas los invito. Les vamos a estar compartiendo las ligas que Sebastián desarrolla o que comparte conocimiento para que puedan entrar y puedan aprender un poco más. Nada, le doy pase a Sebastián. Sebastián.
My turn.
Continúe.
Sí, yo soy Sebastian, yo soy developer advocate en AWS en Francia, en Europa. Yo estoy en París, pero no soy francés, yo soy de Bélgica. Estoy muy feliz de estar aquí con vosotros y mi charla será en inglés, pero porque hacerla en español tomaría mucho tiempo, and that's why I'm switching to English. I will not speak English too fast. Do not hesitate to ask me questions. I'm trying to look at the chats while I'm talking to you, so please ask questions. My talk will be about how you can simplify your web and your mobile application with a cloud-based serverless backend. So the demo of Fernando was really great about showing you how you can integrate, how you can create a REST API, but I will show you how to put all these pieces together. So if you're developing web application or mobile application, stay tuned. I think I have something for you there. My talk will take examples, so I will have hands-on demo in the console with iOS, mobile application on Apple. But it's the same for web with React, Angular. It's the same with Android and even with Flutter. So don't be shy if you're not developing on iOS. It's the same concept that you can apply for your web application or your Android application. Okay, so let's start. And typical day in a developer. I've been developer. I'm still writing code every day, and you have the project manager coming and knocking on your shoulder, saying, "Hello, we need to update or to create a new application." Because competition is doing that, and we don't have a budget for that. It was not planned, so you will be alone. But we need something production ready that can scale. If we have millions of users, we don't want to redo everything. It has to be secure. It has to be easy to manage and operate. Can you do it? And 20 years ago or 10 years ago, maybe that's the time you say, okay, I quit that job. I don't want to do that. I will sell cocktails on a beach somewhere where there is a sun. But no, with serverless and the cloud, it's actually possible to meet these type of requirement. Serverless, from the Stack Overflow developer survey, was solicited by 75% of the respondents, and AWS 68%. And I'm going to talk about the two serverless on AWS today. So like Andres said, I'm quite old in this industry. I'm writing software since 35 years, my first line of code. I work for Sun Microsystems and IBM. I'm 7 years now at AWS. I start with training. I work for the Alexa team in the solution architecture. I was manager for the solution architect in Europe. And I love to develop full stack from the graphical user interface to the backend. So what is serverless? Serverless doesn't mean no server. Okay, serverless means there are servers. Of course, there is no magic there. You cannot run your code in the air, in the cloud. So serverless means that there are servers, but you are not managing these servers. So there is no server to provision or to manage. So you don't need to lose your time by installing Linux, patching Linux or Windows, and maintaining, doing a backup, collecting the logs, restarting the server from time to time, the Windows one at least. No, we are doing that for you. So you do not need to manage and to take care of your own server. It also is going to scale with usage. So if you have 1 million user or just 2 user, it's the same infrastructure for you. No change in the infrastructure. And it has built-in availability for fault tolerance. So we know that in AWS, in a region, there are multiple availability zones. These serverless service that we are offering to you are aware about these multiple availability zones. So in the rare case where one availability zone might have an availability issue, the service will continue to work on the remaining availability zone. It's true for storage, it's true for compute, and for many other services that we are building at regional level. And the best part is that you only pay for what you use. But okay, you're going to tell me, yeah, but with EC2 and the virtual machines, I'm also paying only if the machine is started. Right, you're correct. But let's take the example of the API gateway that Fernando showed just before. With API gateway, you only pay per invocation. There is no cost per hour. So if nobody is calling your API, it's scaled down to 0 and you're paying 0. If 1 million of persons are calling your API, you pay a bit more. But there is no running cost. It really, really depends on the activity on your infrastructure. And typically, when talking about serverless, developers are thinking about cloud functions. We were the very first one to start cloud function in the cloud. We call them AWS Lambda. So Lambda is a service that allows you to run code in the cloud without having a virtual machines. But serverless is not only for compute. It's for API. You just show it before my talk with API Gateway and others. It's also for your developer tools like the build server, the deployment server, like continuous integration, continuous deployment, testing can be done serverless. But it's also for database with Amazon Aurora, with DynamoDB, Neptune, and all the other database options that we have where there is no server or no storage to manage on yourself. S3 was started 14 years ago. 14 years ago. It was the very first Amazon Web Services back in the times. And S3 is serverless. If you look at the previous definition, it scales, it has built-in availability, there is no server to manage, and you pay only for what you use. So S3 is file storage in serverless as well. When is the last time that you upgrade S3 or you install a patch for S3? Never, because we do that for you. We manage the server for you. Okay, I convince you want to use serverless. So where do you start and what is the challenge to start? One of the first challenge is when you go to the AWS console, you have more than 180 services in front of you. And you say, where should I start? Okay, I'm mobile, so maybe I will start in the mobile category. Oh, yeah, but I need a bit of DevOps as well. And of course, I need security. Do I need to learn all this service before writing my first line of code? Of course not. You should not. But if you do so, if you click in the console, you will need to write a lot of lines of code just to set up the plumbing, the undifferentiated heavy lifting. You know, the things that everybody has to do, like create a network, configure a couple of security rules, create roles, create permissions. This requires quite a lot of code. So to help you, we developed a framework, an open source framework called Amplify. And Amplify is a tool that will help you to develop web and mobile application very, very easily from your laptop, from your console, from your terminal, without using the console. It will guide you and propose you the service to use for your use case. So Amplify is organized around use case, like I want to add user authentication in my app, or I want to add file storage in my app. I want to add API. And based on that, it will ask you a few basic questions very easily and generate the infrastructure for you in the cloud. So that's quite high level of abstraction. It hides you from many of the details of the service, and you don't need to learn all the 170 services I just talked about. Amplify will guide you towards what makes more sense for you. So Amplify is a framework. It's made of two parts. The first part, it's a command line interface, a CLI, a command line. From the command line, you can provision services in the cloud. So you can add authentication. It will be implemented by Amazon Cognito. You can add storage. It will be implemented with Amazon S3. You can add an API. It will be implemented by either API Gateway or AppSync. And it will create configuration file for you on your laptop. And then you just type Amplify Push, and it will create all that for you in the cloud using tools that maybe you know already, which is called AWS CloudFormation. So Amplify generates CloudFormation templates and then execute these templates for you in the cloud. That's the first element of Amplify, the command line. The second element of Amplify, it's a set of open source libraries that you can include inside your application. So if you are developing a web application using a React or Angular or Ionic or Vue, we do support all these. We do support also plain old JavaScript as well. On the mobile, we support React Native, we support native iOS with Swift, we support Android with Java and Kotlin. And recently, it's not added on that slide yet, very recently, we also add support for Flutter. So you really have the choice of the tools that you're going to use on the client side. So enough talking about Amplify. Let's show you how it works in reality. What I'm going to do is to create an app that allows to track landmarks. And that app will have picture of the landmark. It will have an API to store the landmark in the database, to retrieve the landmark, and it will have user authentication as well. So if you want to follow step-by-step instruction on iOS to do that, I wrote a workshop for that, Amplify iOS workshops.goaws.com. I will share the slides afterwards, so you will find, don't need to write that, but following that, you can really recreate the application I'm going to show you here. So here I have only like half an hour left, so I will not build the application from scratch, but I will show you the key part of the application, how it works, and how you can use Amplify to create an API, to authenticate user, and to store files. The third thing, before that, maybe I will look at the question if there is anything there. No. Thank you for posting the link to the workshop. If you have questions, just ask your question. You can ask in Spanish. I will try to understand. Otherwise, someone will translate it for me. Thank you. Or you can ask in English or in French. I will answer your question. So the first thing you want to do when you work with Amplify is to have Amplify in it. So here for this demo, I have Xcode. It's the iOS development tool from Apple. And I have the application running there. The code of the application is already there. And I have my terminal with a demo project that I just created before. So there is some source files and stuff like that. So I will amplify that application. The first thing I need to do is to do Amplify init. By doing amplify init, I create the necessary configuration file. It will create a couple of roles on the server for me. You need to have an AWS account, of course, to do that. So it asks me a name for my project, let's say demo, a name for the environment, because it supports multiple environments, more about that later, development. What type of editors I have here, or let's say Studio Code. What type of project is it? Is it Android, iOS, or JavaScript? Here it's iOS. And I think that's it. Now it will ask me also my AWS profile. You know, if you have multiple profile, I have multiple AWS accounts. Which account you want to use, and then it starts to initialize the project in the cloud. So while it's doing that, let's talk about authentication. Most of the time, the first thing you want to add to your application is user authentication. And please don't create user authentication yourself with a MySQL table with username and password, because you will be hacked at some point. Creating secure authentication at scale, it's very complex and doesn't add any value to your project. So your application will be better with if someone else takes care of the authentication. It will be easier to add features like federation or any advanced feature. You do not need to develop that yourself. So to add authentication, you just type amplify add auth. It will ask me a couple of questions like, what type of configuration do you want? Here I want default configuration. How do I want to authenticate my user? Username, email, phone number, both of them. Here, just username, and that's it. I'm done. I don't need to give any other configuration. So the next step is actually to type amplify push. And Amplify Push will execute my configuration in the cloud. So right now, it will, with Amplify Push, really create a configuration for me in the cloud, in a serverless configuration. This one is going to use Cognito. So let me explain a bit what I'm doing here. So Cognito, it's a serverless service on AWS that allows to store user profile and to perform user authentication. By authentication, I mean sign in, sign out, but also sign up, like register a new user. It supports multi-factor authentication, so it can send your user by email or by SMS a one-time password. It also supports identity federation, so you can include with login with Facebook, login with Google, login with Amazon, signing with Apple, or anything else that supports SAML, Samuel, or OpenID Connect. So Amplify now is creating that for me in the cloud automatically. So that's the server side of Amplify. It's creating the server and configuring the server for me. Now on the client side, what do I need to change in my app if I want to integrate the authentication that I'm creating? It's actually super simple. First, you need to add the authentication plugin to the Amplify library inside your code. So typically you do that at the start of your application. If it is React, it's just an import statement at the beginning of the app. If it is in Android, you go with Gradle to integrate the libraries. With iOS, it's Cocoa Pod. And so you integrate the libraries, and at the beginning of the code, I think for me, it's in the app delegate that I'm doing that here. Yes, it's in the app delegate. I'm adding all my plugin. Once again, the code you're seeing here on the right side is the finished application. So it has more lines of code than what you see on the slide. But basically, I just add the Cognito plugin and called Amplify Configure. I can call Amplify Configure because the command line here is actually generating a configuration file for me, which contains all the address, the ARN, the ARN, of the services that it creates for me. So for the Cognito service, it generates an ARN. And so that's how my app knows where to talk to which service it needs to talk to in the cloud. Once you have initialized the library, the next thing is to call amplify.auth.signin, and you pass a username and a password, and then you test asynchronously the result. And that's it. That's all what you need in your app to integrate with Cognito authentication. So let me show you that here. Maybe I should change a line of code to show you how it works. With where is my content here? My content view, app delegate is there, and landing, landmark listing delegate. I lost my main view. I don't know where it is, which is a bit embarrassing to change that. Here it is. No, that's my custom login view. Signing, landmark row, landmark details, landing view. Voila. This is what I was looking for. So let's show you that that code is actually working. I can compile that code and I can start the application on an iOS simulator. And it should start within a few seconds. And it lands on a user interface and it crashes. That's the typical demo effect where it was working like 15 minutes before doing the demo. I know it doesn't crash. It's because I clicked everywhere and I include a breakpoint. Big mistake. Oops. So let's do that. That's because I'm live. And you see, that's a user interface I created to collect a username and a password. And that user interface will actually call the code that I show you on the slide. And the code I show you on the slide is super, super easy. It will just say, hey, this is my sign in. I'm calling Amplify auth signing with a username and a password that I'm collecting here. So I create a username and password incognito already. So I can just type my super secure password and you see that I can log in into an application and log out of the application. That's great. But it obliged me to create a user interface, which I'm lazy, I don't want to do. So another options that you have in Cognito is to use a hosted web user interface, which is really great for web applications. So if you're developing on React, you can just redirect your user to Cognito, they authenticate on the Cognito user interface, and then they come back to your application. You can do that in mobile too. The advantage of that is that if you configure Cognito for login with Facebook, login with Google or others, you have 0 lines of code to add in your application because it's managed on the server side by Cognito yourself. So here I will show you how to use the hosted user interface and federated authentication. To call the hosted user interface, you just need to call a different method in Amplify. Instead of having Amplify auth signing with web user sign in here, instead of having sign in with username and password, you can just call sign in with web user interface. And then the user will be redirected to the web user interface. I want to show you that in this app. So let's move my beautiful login screen and let's try another login screen, the one from Cognito. And here, because I'm signed out, it shows a sign in button. And when I click on this sign in button, it says, hey, this app wants to redirect you to Cognito. Do you agree? Yes. And it's a web browser which is starting. And inside that web browser, I can authenticate just like I did in my custom view. But if you configure that on the server side, you can also have login with Facebook, Google, Amazon, or anything else there without writing a single lines of code. And you see the same works. I can log in and log out. Log out goes to the web page of Cognito as well. 0 lines of code to have authentication on the server side, or to have federation of authentication with Facebook, with Amazon, Facebook, Amazon, Google, signing with Apple and others. Okay, now I have user authentication. How can I add an API inside my my application? In this example, I will do things a bit different than what Fernando showed you before. Fernando showed you about REST API. Here I'm going to use a GraphQL API. So what is GraphQL? It's a query language for API, and it has been created by Facebook a couple of years ago to how to say that, to work more easily with data. One of the big disadvantage of REST API is that if you ask a document in a REST API, it will return you all the document, and maybe there are thousands of rows that you do not want or do not need to use on the client side. So it will increase the network latency, the time to process, the time to transfer the data. While maybe you can ask, hey, I just need for this screen, I just need a name, username, password, email, and nothing else. So GraphQL allows you to do that. It allows the client to specify exactly the level of data that you want to retrieve, and it can make nested call on the server. So one call from the client can retrieve multiple data from a graph of data, hence the name GraphQL, graph query language. So another advantage of GraphQL over REST is that GraphQL is strongly typed. So you start with a type definition. What are you going to manage? What are the data that you're going to manage? Here in this example, I will manage a node with just an ID, a value, and then you define the operation. And there are three different types of operation that GraphQL can perform on a type. It can query your type. So query is anything reading the database. It can mutate. Mutate is the create, the update, and the delete part where you change the data. And then it has something quite interesting, which is a subscription. And a subscription is actually your client connecting to the server, saying, hey, server, please let me know if something changed on that data. And that's the way for your client to be notified asynchronously when something happens on the server. Facebook is using that all the time. If you use the Facebook web or mobile app, you know that when someone is commenting on your post, you see three little dots, and then you see the post appearing. It's because the client Facebook application is actually using a subscription to the server to receive the updates on your post in real time. So there are many companies using GraphQL, including Airbnb, including Facebook, of course. And I want to show you GraphQL here. Amplify is not tied to GraphQL. You can do Amplify with REST API. I just posted a video recently on my YouTube channel to show you how to do that with a Lambda function, just like Fernando showed before. So you can do that with Amplify as well. But here for this talk, I choose to use a GraphQL. So the idea with GraphQL is you, as a developer, you define the operation. Here it's a query, for example, to get all the posts on a comment. I call the get post query, get post for post one, and I want to retrieve the ID, the title, the comments, and for all the comments, the content, the author, and for the author name. So you send that over HTTPS to a GraphQL server running in the cloud, and the GraphQL server will resolve that query. So it will fetch the data, maybe from multiple data sources, like you might have a NoSQL database, a relational database, and different other data sources like an AWS Lambda function. The server will aggregate the data and return you a JSON document with just the data set that you ask. So that's the improvement over REST, because over REST, you probably would have to issue 3 calls for the 3 data source and make the aggregation yourself on the client side. Here, it's done on the server side. So the server side element is AppSync. AppSync, it's an AWS service, a serverless service that implements GraphQL interface. How can I add the GraphQL API to my application? Just like the other, just Amplify add and then API. The first question Amplify is going to ask me is, do you want a GraphQL API or a REST API? So here for this example, I'm choosing GraphQL. Once again, you can use REST if you prefer. Name, How do you want to protect access? Just using an API key, an IAM user, a token if you have your user authenticated with OpenID Connect. Here, I just created brand new Cognito user pool. It's Chinese, new. So let's use it. And no, I'm done. Do you have a schema? I say no, and it will create one for me, an example schema for me. I can choose anything because I'm going to replace that anyway. Do you want to edit the schema? No, and that's it. So after that, I can just do Amplify Push, and it will create the AppSync server for me in the cloud. So the schema that I'm using for this application, it's a bit more complicated than the one I show you on the slide. The schema for this application has an ID, a name, a category, city, state, its feature, its favorite, coordinates, which is another type, which is defined somewhere else, and an image name. So that's the schema that my application is going to use. And because we have a type there, we have a strong type definition with strings, Boolean. So the framework knows what are the data we are going to handle. Because of that, it can generate codes for you automatically. And it's asking me that, no, do you want to generate code for your newly created GraphQL API? I can say yes. And this is where the file will be. And I want to generate all the queries, mutation, and subscription. And it will create a file called API Swift for me automatically. So that's also something we cannot do with REST. It's automatic code generation. We can do that with GraphQL because it's strongly typed. Two things. The schema, first, it defines the styles, of course. But you can also add annotation, transformer. And I'm using in this example 2 transformer. One of them says model. 1 word, 5 letters. Model, it tells AppSync to create a database behind the API so that it can store your data. And auth, as the name implies, means only authenticated customer can access this. And you can define the rules. Is it private? Is it public? Where is the authentication provider? It's my Cognito user pool. What are the operations that you authorize? Read, update, delete. You can define groups. And just by defining these transformer, Amplify will generate code to configure AppSync for your security automatically. So it's a very, very convenient and neat way to define the authorization model on your data. At any time, you can regenerate the code with Amplify code gen models, and that code will land into your app. So here in Xcode, I have the generated models, and you can see that the landmark data has an ID, a name. So all that code is generated for you. For Android, for JavaScript, if you are developing a web application, you don't need to take care about the models. They are generated for you automatically. To add the API category to my app, I just add the API plugin here. And after that, I define the create, read, update, delete API. For example, to query all the landmarks, I'm calling Amplify API query. And the request will be a list, and that has been generated by Amplify for me with this type of data. All I need to do is to collect the result after and check if it is a success or a failure. If it is a success, I refresh the user interface. And that's it. That's all I have to do. This is what is being generated right now. You see the text is scrolling on the left side on my screen. So right now, it's creating an AWS AppSync gateway, so a GraphQL API gateway for me. And that GraphQL will have the schema I mentioned, but I mentioned just the type of the data. Amplify is generating for me all the operation on this data. So the get landmark, the list landmark, the create landmark, update, delete, and also the subscription. It's also creating a database for me with a DynamoDB and a table for me. It creates a data source inside AppSync that will link with DynamoDB. And to make the glue between the schema and the data source, AppSync, and actually all GraphQL server needs something called resolver. So resolver is the piece of code that will take the JSON received from the client and fetch the data in the database and then filter the result before sending the result back to the client. So all that is generated for me, and at the end I just receive the endpoint of my GraphQL server. I can show you that. I can go to my console. Where is it? My console. Probably this one. Yep. And this is my AppSync console. I hope it's big enough for you. You see I have a multiple AppSync implementation. The one my iOS app is using here is iOS Workshop Final. And from there, I can directly run a query. So it knows the queries that have been generated for me. And there is a query simulator here that I can use directly here. So for example, I can list all the landmark. If I click list landmark, I should be able to list all the landmark. Yes, first is to delete these. I don't need a get landmark data right now. I just want list landmark. Voila. Oops. And yes, it's because it's expecting a navigation token. Let's just click this. Oh, I didn't specify any item. So you see it's just returning a next token. Let's say that in my items, I want the city and the ID, maybe the name as well. So it creates the query there. I can execute the query, and now I can see all the landmarks coming from my database. Oh, there is one from my native, the city where I'm born. It's Brussels. So maybe I can use that ID to make a call to get landmark data. And I will ask also the city category, the coordinates, latitude, longitude, image name, update at. And if I call that, now I get all the details about Brussels. So this is how you can test your queries in the cloud. And this is how my app there is getting the value by just making, let me re-authenticate to the app again, by just making a call to GraphQL, fetch all the data about this place, so the name, the coordinates, and stuff like that. The only thing missing in my explanation is how I get these nice image. Where do I store these nice image? So to do that with Amplify, you can do that by creating another category called storage. So I can say Amplify add storage. There are two types of storage supported by Amplify: content, like image, video, audio, or a NoSQL database, but here I want to store content. So let's use content. What's the friendly name for my project? Like content, the name of the bucket, and who can access that bucket? Only authenticated user, and authenticated user can do create, read, and delete. Do I want a trigger for the object in my bucket? No. That's it. I can type Amplify Push, and it will generate a bucket for me and secure that bucket for me. On the client side, I receive high-level commands. So Amplify storage, download data, and I just give the name of the file on S3. It will provide me with a progress listener, with a result listener that I can call, that will be called for me when the data will be available. Same for upload. There is one single upload method where your application can upload. So what does it generate there on the left side while it's working? It's creating an S3 bucket and securing that bucket. You have different types of storage inside the bucket. You have public, private, and protected. Private, it's only for you. Public is for everybody. And protected, it's a mix of the two. You can define the rules of who can write inside your protected bucket. And this is how it works in this app. So all these images are stored on S3, and they are retrieved asynchronously as the application is loading. You can see that when I'm connecting, you see the image appearing progressively as they are being loaded. see the image. Okay, it was in the cache probably already, but the first time I run the application, the image were appearing one by one. So that's how you can. So right now in this app, I have user authentication with Cognito in serverless. I have file storage with Amazon S3 in serverless, and I have a GraphQL API with DynamoDB table all in serverless. If you create a web app, not a mobile app like React or Angular, you want also to deploy that web app. You can do that from Amplify as well. So you can type Amplify add hosting, and it will create an hosting infrastructure for you. So you do not need to have a web server to host a React or an Angular web application, because a web server, it's not serverless. You still need to manage an EC2 instance. You need to patch and to configure that in EC2 instance with Nginx or Apache. So with add hosting, what we are creating, it's a web server on Amazon S3. S3 talks HTTPS, your browser talks HTTPS, so S3 is a good candidate to be a server. If you ask for a development server, it will just create an Amazon S3 bucket. But if you ask for a production server, it will also put a CloudFront distribution, so a CDN, a content delivery network distribution in front of you for your application. Wow, that was quite a long journey. How much time do I have? Okay, I'm a bit slow here. Let's have a look at the question in the chat. There is a question from Samuel saying AWS services are frequently updated, which can lead to application problems. Yes, our services are very frequently updated, so we improve the service based on your feedback, on customer feedback. But no, it doesn't bring compatibility problem, because as far as I know, we never deprecated an API. We change sometimes a bit I have one example in mind with Amazon S3 recently, but most of the time we are adding functionalities, and we are working really hard to maintain the compatibility of our API. So it should be painless. Most of the update on the server side does not affect you. And I'm using Amplify since 2 years now. And I've been through many releases of the Amplify command line and the Amplify libraries. And most of the time, it's totally painless. Sometimes there are tiny change when we change a major version of Amplify. So you have to pay attention about the release notes, just like you would do normally, to see if anything new can break your application code, and of course test the change before releasing to production. But overall, it's extremely stable, and I have 2 or 3 applications live using Amplify, and I never had a compatibility issue at large scale with a new release of Amplify. So I hope this answers your question, Samuel. Couple of advanced tips for Amplify, but I will go faster on these. It's a bit more advanced. Last year, we released Amplify Data Store. So Amplify Data Store, it's an on-device persistent storage. So it's a database inside your application on the client side. So we are using IndexedDB for web application. We are using SQLite for iOS and Android. And the API of Amplify, if you use Data Store, you as a developer just talk with the local database on your application. And then Amplify Data Store will synchronize that data with the backends through AppSync and versioning. It will take care of version control. It will take care of conflict. And it will take care of network connection. So if your application goes offline for a short period of time, it can reconnect automatically and fetch the latest change from the browser, from the server, whenever your application comes back online. So the way it works, it's because we provide a sync engine inside the data store. So you as a developer, you just have read, update, delete, create very simple CRUD API from the data store. The data store will store that in a local engine, so you will have your local data inside the app, so it can work offline. And whenever you change something, it will push the data to the backend. But if another user is also changing something on the backend, the change will be subscribed, will be reflect into your local storage. So using data store is super easy to create applications that can work offline. Another black belt tip for Amplify is that Amplify supports Git workflow. So if you create multiple branch, Amplify will create an infrastructure for every single branch. So if I'm working on my branch on a new feature, for example, I will have my infrastructure, my Cognito, my AppSync, my DynamoDB, and so on. So it allows me to continue to work without impacting my colleagues working in other branch. And when we merge branch, Amplify automatically deletes the infrastructure that has been created for your branch. So Amplify checkout and the name of your environment, Amplify add and the name of your environment if you want to work with multiple branch on Amplify. And finally, Amplify also supports continuous integration and continuous deployment for web application. So if you are developing React, Angular, Vue application, you can connect the Amplify console inside to your source code repository, GitHub, Bitbucket, GitLab, code commit. And whenever you make a change on your source code, it will trigger a build automatically and deploy your web application automatically. So you have continuous integration, continuous deployment built into Amplify. This is a graphical user interface in the console. You can just check for Amplify console to find that. I'm not sure I have a project deployed on this account, in this region. I have a couple, but in my private account. Yes, here I have. Wow, yeah, that's actually many demo that I forgot to delete. But you can connect from your source code. It can detect your build settings, create a build setting for you there, and deploy automatically for you. And you have a nice console that shows you the progress of your pipeline, of your pipe deployment. We also added higher level categories in Amplify, so it integrates with high level machine learning services that we provide. So you have a category for prediction that allows very easily to translate text from one language to the other, to convert text to speech using one of the voice from Pari, recognize elements inside an image like recognize text or recognize objects inside an image, recognize entities as well, or transcribe text. So you give an audio stream and it generates the text for you. So all these are using Amazon Translate, Pari, transcribe, recognition, text extract, comprehend, all these machine learning services that you can access with 1 or 2 lines of code from within your Amplify application. So sorry, I've been a bit long. I gave a lot of details. I guess I feel good here, so I'm talking a bit more than usual. What we did just do, we created a front-end application. In this example was with iOS, but once again, it can be with a web application, React Native, Vue, Ionic, Angular, Android. And in that web application, we had user authentication with Amazon Cognito in serverless, with signing, sign up, identity federation. We had create, read, update, delete capabilities on a data model, which is backed up by a NoSQL database, Amazon DynamoDB, and the interface, it's a GraphQL AppSync API. And then we had storage to upload and download files from Amazon S3 very securely. So the final architecture is this. We have this application talking to Cognito to authenticate the user. Cognito deliver tokens. These tokens are used to protect access to AWS AppSync, which access to DynamoDB. And those tokens are used to get a temporary access key, secret key from Cognito identity pool to access Amazon S3. So 1, 2, 3, 4 server, fully serverless, 0 virtual machines to manage, no Linux, no Windows to manage. It will scale with millions of users if I have millions of users without changing anything from that architecture. So now it's your turn. Build something. Go ahead, open your IDE, start to build, start to implement your application, and let us know. Send me a message on Twitter, on LinkedIn to say, hey, Seb, I built that after your talk. I love to see your creativity there. If you want tutorials in the Getting Started page of AWS, so it's aws.amazon.com/getting started. And then you click on Learning Path. It's a bit difficult to find. That's why I put the URL there. Learning Path, Front-End Developer. We have 4 tutorials for you. One with React and one with Flutter that my colleague Nader wrote, so React and Flutter, and I wrote the one for iOS and for Android. So these tutorials are really step-by-step instruction to create a very simple application with Cognito, with AppSync, with DynamoDB, and S3, exactly like I showed it today. We have a question from Thibaut. Can we use storage and GraphQL? And can we use storage and GraphQL and other service with user authentication? Yes, storage. So Amplify will protect the storage automatically with the user authentication. So actually, when you add your category for storage and GraphQL, the Amplify command line will ask you, how do you want to protect that? Do you want to protect it with an IAM key or with an API key in the case of AppSync, or maybe with an OpenID Connect token? So maybe your application is not using Cognito. It's perfectly valid to do so. And you have an OpenID Connect, a JWT token, and you want to reuse that token to protect access to the API. Or the last option is to use Cognito, and then Amplify will do everything for you. So yes, you can use storage, GraphQL, and other categories of Amplify with user authentication. And I see that Carlos and Andres are very good at searching the AWS website because they found the page that I have here on the screen. It's also in the chat. So feel free to click on that link or to take a picture of that link so you can find 4 tutorials: React, iOS, Android, and Flutter. Talking about podcasts, the AWS user group in Peru has a podcast, if I understand correctly what you said at the beginning. There is a Spanish podcast for LATAM as well, run by my colleagues, solution architect in LATAM. They have 16 episodes right now, and they are creating more every month. I have a podcast as well, but it's in French, so unless you are speaking French, it will not be super useful for you. So maybe this one is much better for you in terms of language because it speaks Spanish. But otherwise, you can find me on Twitch, on LinkedIn, on YouTube, and I have a lot of code. All the Amplify sample code that I show you today is also available on my GitHub, and it's pretty much consistent. It's Sepsto everywhere except on Twitch. Voilà, muchas gracias. Bien, merci à tous. Thank you for attending. I can take any question now or question just after on Twitter. I will continue to follow up the conversation with you on Twitter. Andres, Carlos, your turn.
Wow, that was such a great presentation, Sebastian. I mean, Seb. I mean, Seb. Yeah, this is it. That was great. I'm not a developer, but I'm really interested of coding a little bit in Android and in iOS applications and another kind of great stuff that you show us. So that was so good. I have a little questions, maybe just
Sure.
in the serverless perspective. I mean. So let me put it on the screen to discuss a little bit about it. One of the things my boss always tell me, maybe, and in a lot of projects that we start about serverless, and we are just figuring out if we are going to do it in containers or we're going to do it in serverless. So this approach that you show us, we can see all the powerful things in serverless, but how can we gain more view in a project and make it full serverless? What are the advantages of doing serverless instead of doing containers, for example?
Actually, it's not one or the other. You can do containers and serverless as well. So containers are there since quite a couple of years now, and it's an easy way to break down your application in small pieces. Many are implementing microservices or small services using containers. And the advantage of containers is that it's very easy to move from the developer laptop to test environment to production environment, and everything is contained, as the name, inside the container. So I'm not saying you should drop the container and redevelop everything on Lambda, but there is no advantage of doing that. I mean, it's a lot of transformation. If you have something that works with container, continue to use containers. The only thing, the reason why I said it's not one or the other, it's because you can run containers on a serverless architecture as well. So traditionally, in the past, to run containers, you need to have EC2 instances, and then you run your container on top of the EC2 instance. And you use a container orchestration tool, such as Kubernetes or Apache Mesos, or maybe ECS, Elastic Container Service from AWS, to do the orchestration of the containers, to decide where to start a new container, to replace the containers automatically. And it does that on EC2 instance. But last year, I think, or 2 years ago, we introduced a Fargate, AWS Fargate. So Fargate, it's ECS, it's the same container orchestration technology that the one I was just talking about. But instead of running on your EC2 instance, it runs on our EC2 instance. So you do not need to start, to manage, to scale, to patch your EC2 instance anymore. We are doing that for you. So with Fargate, you just tell us, hey, I have 10 containers here, and I want to run these containers. Please do it for me. And Fargate will create EC2 instance, but not on your account. You will not see them, and execute these containers, run these containers for you in the cloud. So Fargate is really serverless applied to containers. You do not need to manage your own virtual machines anymore. So it's not one or the other. It's not serverless or containers. You can continue to go with your containers even without managing servers. And Fargate works with ECS, Elastic Container Service. I'm always hesitating about the service name, ECS, but also works with EKS, Elastic Kubernetes Services. So if your preference is to deploy on Kubernetes, you can have Fargate running on EKS. So no server to manage for you in the cloud.
That's great. That's a great answer. We have to maybe find a balance of those two technologies, maybe. There's a mix of services, one thing on containers, and you also, in most of the serverless project or container projects, there are some components, maybe containers, you have to still using, for example, decoupling services like SQS, SNS, or other serverless like S3 that you mentioned, right? So there exists like a balance between those technologies that you have to find out. So that's great. But that is something that really came up when we are starting a new project. Also, people also tells we are or we go full serverless or we go full containers, and maybe the answer there is, hey,
it's in between the two.
Exactly.
It's in between the two, and you can. I repeat, you can do container serverless as well. Container doesn't mean you have to manage your EC2 server. And in reality, you will have a bit of everything. You will be some part will be in containers, some part will be on serverless, on Lambda function, depending on what you want to do and the scalability. For example, if you want to process data that arrive on S3 or process data that arrive on DynamoDB, like a trigger, then it makes sense to have a Lambda function, because Lambda function can be triggered automatically from S3. Container wouldn't make sense for that. I mean, you would need to write code to make the plumbing yourself between S3 and the container. So depending on what you want to do, sometimes it's probably better to have a container. Sometimes it makes more sense to have an AWS Lambda function.
Great. That's great. That leaves that um, uh, put me on thinking about the next questions. That is,
Mm-hmm.
if we mix those technologies or these technologies, I want to put it on the screen. For example, we have to think about the tools
Mm-hmm.
that we use for, or maybe our development team we are going to use. Maybe, for example, if we make a mix, we have to choose between, I don't know, Terraform, CloudFormation, CDK, or maybe Amplify framework that you talk about. So if we make that kind of mix between services, it is worth combining multiple frameworks from the point of view of a developer that maybe them have to code in two frameworks or maybe more than one. What do you think
Mm-hmm.
about choosing the right framework and specifically focus it on Amplify? That is really, really awesome things that we can do with Amplify.
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's not an easy choice. So Amplify is really well adapted to development that are driven by the front end. I mean, if that's why I say I'm talking to full stack developer here. You have a development team that is in charge of the front end and the back end, and they have to do everything by themselves. And it's the front end driving most of the project. I mean, it's a requirement of the front end that define what type of API, what are the data that we want to use. Probably there is no existing API to integrate on, or not so much, and you're more starting from an empty status, like a green field or a white sheet of paper. Then Amplify fits really well into that. So when it's driven by the front end and with no or little pre-existing infrastructure to tap into, that's where Amplify is best. If you have separate teams, like backend team that creates the API, manage the data, there is 10 years of history and tons of API gateway to reuse and to include into a front end, maybe Amplify is not the best tool to get started with that. It's possible, but it has not been designed for that. It has not been conceived for that. So once again, it depends on what you want to do. Where Amplify really shines is for when it's the front end developer that is driving the development.
Okay, so it's focused on more of front end developers. That's really
it's a focus on front end developer. That's a good summary. There is a question in the chat from, let's say I have some legacy application. Is there any service that can help me to wrap the application and host it on Fargate? Looking forward to take advantage of serverless containers. That's a difficult question because it depends on your application. Not all application can be containerized and run in a container. For example, if you have a huge SAP ERP enterprise system, SAP doesn't work in a container. If you have a huge Oracle database, maybe it doesn't fit inside a container. So it really depends on the size of your application and how easy or not it is to break it down in small pieces and break it, like we say, break the monolith into different services. I don't necessarily want to say microservices because it might be fat services, but the point is to try to break the different parts. And the way to get started most of the time is to understand the dependencies between the different modules of the application and start with the easiest, start with the low-hanging fruit, the apple that you can take easily without any tools. Maybe the user profile service, or maybe, it depends on your application. And first isolate that, and then isolate a second one, and then a third one, and do that iteratively until all your application is break down into multiple parts.
That's a great strategy in taking the easiest parts, or maybe not the easiest, but the one thing that maybe are not the core of the application, and
Exactly.
maybe you can try to convert those applications or to serverless first.
Exactly.
Yes.
I'm not saying it's easy. It's very easy to tell you that during a meetup on Twitch. Yeah, you just do that and that. In reality, it's more complicated. It will take time, but it's doable. It's doable. That's the message. You can
Great.
do it.
That's great. I have the last questions. That are my three questions.
Mhm.
I think, but I think you're going to help a lot of people that are listening to us talking about serverless, or maybe their first experience in serverless, and also developers. So the third one is this. I think there are like sounds like they are common questions, but what are your recommendations for testing serverless in local environments?
Mhm.
I heard a lot about developers saying that they need, or they are in the need of testing in local
Mhm.
environments, and maybe they are not used to use, for example, Cloud9, or maybe
Mhm.
deploying every time just to check if Lambda is working good, or if, I don't know.
Yeah,
Do
that's
you have any methods or recommendations that we have from them, and to specifically think that you have the tools to use it on local, or you have to that you have to think differently and move to the cloud to start your testing in serverless? I don't know. What do you think?
um, it's difficult, but it's nice to have local environment, not only for network reason. Of course, I can be in a train from time to time, or when we were able to travel, I would be in an airplane, and I want to continue to develop. So that's the reason why I want to have a local environment. Another reason why I want to have local environment is for my unit testing. Most of the time, you set up a lot of tests, and you want every time you git push something to have unit testing. That doesn't necessarily go to your AWS account and generate charge and cost on your AWS account. So you want something like a mock-up of AWS. So there are different ways to do that. And it depends on the framework you are using again. So for Lambda function, the general idea is to run a local version of the Lambda function inside a container. So you can create a container that
Mhm.
behave like Lambda and receive the code, test your code locally inside your locally running Docker container, and shut down the container after that. Some frameworks are doing that for you. Amplify can do that for you. So you have local testing of Amplify Lambda functions with that. If you are using serverless application model, SAM,
Mhm.
SAM has also SAM local invoke, so you can invoke your function locally. SAM also simulate the API gateway and the HTTP API gateway that Fernando was showing before, so you can even test that locally with SAM.
Or
Um,
the responses that you have on API gateway, you can test it locally with some.
correct,
Okay.
correct.
Oh, wow, that's great.
For DynamoDB, we have a DynamoDB local. It's a small Java application that you can run locally. It's like a mini DynamoDB. So don't try to run your production workload on that on your laptop, but it has the same API. It doesn't scale the same way. You can not get millions of API per second on that version, but it's API compatible with the real DynamoDB. So you can create that, and then you have an endpoint which points to HTTP local host on a specific port, and you can interact with DynamoDB like that. For the rest, it's a bit more complicated. There is one open source project, but I forgot the name. I'm sorry. It's called I will find it quite easily if you give me 2 seconds to search. But there is one open source project that tries to mock up all the AWS API.
Yeah, I
And
think
so you can run that inside a container. It gives you an endpoint, and it has a mockup for S3, for DynamoDB, and for many other services, for Cognito. So you can try to use that. I will find it. It's
Yeah, I think that is
authorized
the most
or
difficult part, that replicate all. And uh, if there is something that you said that there is an open source tool, that will be great to share.
yeah.
And
So
you can share the specifications.
Moto is one of them. Oh, sorry,
What?
Moto is one of them. It's not
About.
the one I was thinking about. It's not that one, but I know that one. Actually, the one I was thinking about is from using that in Soto project. So if I search for Soto project, I should be able to find it. So Soto is an unofficial SDK for Swift, and because I'm spending a lot of my time in iOS, spend time there. But yep, I have to. Maybe there I will find that to answer your question. Workflow CI. Local stack, that's the name I was searching. So
local stack.
Local stack, yeah. So it's on GitHub as well. Oops, it's a bit too big probably.
I think I have the link here. I think.
Yeah, localstack.cloud. That's the project, localstack.cloud. So that's something you can create inside the Docker container, and it gives you a mock-up of your AWS app, of the AWS API.
Oh, great. Let me show on the screen. There is local stack. Great.
Yeah, sorry for my bad memory. It took me a while to to remember the name. Oops, but yes, okay. So there are a couple of options to test offline.
Okay, thank you, Seb. So that was a great session. I also I want to end this session and just do you remember about what I told you about the questions?
Yeah, sure.
So I think there is a time. It's the time now to ask a couple of questions for giving away some AWS credits. I'm going to say it in Spanish for everyone can understand correctly. Very well. Muchachos, los que están activos todavía en el chat, sería bueno que estén atentos a las preguntas que va a hacer Sebastian. Vamos a hacer giveaways de créditos de AWS. El monto es sorpresa, así que estén atentos y respondan, y dependiendo de eso les enviamos los créditos. ¿Sí? Okay, go ahead.
So first question is true or false. I can do true or false question.
Of course, yes.
Yes. Okay. So it's true or false. Verdad o falso. Amplify est un framework. Is a framework only for mobile application. So Amplify es una framework solamente por las aplicaciones móvil. True or false?
Okay, here, let's see. False. The Martin Hesse2 says it's false.
Can I give the right answer? Or do you wait for more?
Let's wait a couple of seconds, maybe.
Okay.
Yeah.
Who is AWS Peru on Facebook?
No, that's my account, but actually I think Andre is answering. But Andre, you can do it. Okay, we have 3 false. You can say now the answer.
So pourquoi? No, so it's false. That's correct. That's the correct answer. Because with Amplify, you can develop mobile application, but you can also develop web application for React, for Android. For React, for Angular, for Vue and Ionic. So Amplify works both with web application and mobile application.
Great. So we have the first winner, Martin, the first winner. He's really excited about it. I ain't tell anyone about how much AWS credits you're going to win. No le he dicho a nadie cuántos créditos va a ganar, pero va a ser sorpresa. Lo único que les digo es que no va a ser lo normal, no va a ser los $25 normales, sino va a ser un poquito más. Así que atentos a las 2 siguientes preguntas o a la última pregunta, depends on you, Sebastian. We have 1 more or 2 more questions.
I don't know. I'm making the question as we are talking. How many do you want?
No, I think 1 more. One
more. Okay, one more. One more. One more, and one more. What is the database which is used by default by AWS Amplify? ¿Cuál es la database? How do you say database?
Sí. ¿Cuál es la base de datos por default que usa Amplify Framework? Esa es la pregunta. ¿Verdadero o falso?
No
verdadero.
No, ¿cuál es? ¿Cuál es la database? ¿Cómo se llama la database? I give the name, I think 100 times during my talk. I repeat, check.
Of course, yeah, we have the first answer, DynamoDB, the first option. Let's see if we have someone else. Okay, we have a few options. Of course, MX says it's DynamoDB. Martins again is saying GraphQL. Okay. Andre is also saying it's GraphQL. What do you say, Seb?
GraphQL is not a database. GraphQL, it's an API language. It's a way to create an API, like we have REST and we have GraphQL. So it's one or the other. And so GraphQL is implemented on AWS with a service called AppSync. And AWS Amplify is using DynamoDB.
Yes.
Amazon DynamoDB as a database. So DynamoDB is a NoSQL database, key value store that is designed to scale to millions of rows. We had peak to millions of API calls per second during the last Amazon Prime Day a few weeks ago.
Exactly, that's great. So we have the second winner is Accours MX. So felicitaciones, Accours. Luego te contactamos para poner. Yeah, great. I have one more question.
Sure.
You mentioned about 4 frameworks or front-end frameworks that Amplify uses. You can develop on top of these frameworks for front-end developers.
That's correct.
So I'm going to say it in Spanish. ¿Cuáles menciona al menos 2 de los 4 o 5 frameworks para frontend que ha mencionado Seb durante su presentación? Ha habido como 5. Bueno, we have I was just saying the question and there are answers already.
Yeah, that's exactly that. Yes, I mentioned them quite a lot because I know I'm making my demo on iOS and I don't want to disconnect from the web developer. That's why I'm repeating all the time. It also works with web. And yes, that's the one you mentioned. So Luis says React, Vue, Angular. David said Vue, React. Yeah.
But Vue? Do you mention Vue?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, if you take my screen again, I have the slide that I show on the screen. So Vue, React, Angular, Ionic.
Ionic, yes. Flutter.
Plain JavaScript. Flutter since a few weeks ago. It's brand new. I didn't try it yet. Flutter, and on the native side, React Native, iOS, and Android.
So I'm going to put 2 winners on this. Luis and David, that are people that I know. I think I know there are actually a lot of on our AWS events here. So Luis and David, congratulations for those last 2 AWS credits that we're going to give. Yes, Luis, and here David. David, cheers from Lima. I think David is from Mexico. So
wow.
Hi to AWS lovers from Mexico. And also for Luis. Another question. Do you have another question? Maybe, o André, ¿tú tienes alguna pregunta adicional que quieres hacer al público?
No, está bien. Creo que han habido 3 ganadores.
Dice, ahí dice, David said, actually David is AWS leader of the community in Mexico. So he's saying that this AWS credit is going to give away in their community. So that's great.
Great. Let's make another question then.
Yes. Please have the honor of the last question.
Andres, you have an idea?
Or Andre, yes.
Looks like we lost the video. It's not moving anymore. I see. A question on Amplify. True or false? True or false? With Amplify, I can create continuous integration and continuous deployment pipeline easily. So true or false? Can I create continuous integration, continuous deployment pipeline with Amplify? Come on, David.
I think David had the right answer. It's true.
It's true. Yeah, that's correct. Martin is saying integrated with GitHub, GitLab, code commit. Correct.
Yeah, excellent.
So it's not in the command line interface. You need to go to the console for that, and inside the console, and of course it applies only to web application, not to mobile application.
Yo creo que il est possible utiliser Bitbucket aussi.
Oui, GitHub, GitLab, code commit, Bitbucket, correct.
Bitbucket also, yes. Great. So also Martin is saying that he's going to donate that credit. Wow, that's people didn't don't need AWS credits anymore. Yeah, but it's great that these AWS credits are donated. People really need it. So no, I think we are out of credits. We don't have more credits. David, I'm so sorry. We didn't have more credits. We have to just a few ones for the next event, and we are just done from this year. So I want to thank Seb again for being here, for share your expertise in serverless environments, in serverless architectures, Amplify development. It's like I feel this like a masterclass of what you have to do to start developing in AWS and using serverless. I really love the link that you shared with us about the workshop you do in serverless iOS framework. And I don't know which is, I think it's the
Amplify iOS workshop. Yeah.
Exactly. Amplify iOS workshop will go, right?
No, it's go-aws. That's the address of the website. But yeah, the workshop is really detailed instruction to build the application that you saw there. And on the last link I share, there are 4 tutorials. So even if you're not using iOS, you will find a tutorial for React, for Flutter, for Android, and for iOS on the learning page. Yes, on that one.
Okay, learning path from developer. Okay, great. So we really enjoy. It's a pleasure to have you here, and I hope it's not only the first time that you have been here. So maybe in 2021, we also after reInvent also we have, because the reInvent is like an explosion for all of us to just figuring out what is going to happen there. So I hope we have another opportunity to have you here, Seb. We really enjoyed this session, and again, it's a pleasure to have you. Please.
It will be my pleasure to come back online, or if the world reopen, I will be happy to fly to Peru as well. That would be my first time in Peru, so it's a good occasion to go. And I would love to make a tour in Latin America, maybe in 2021 or 2022. Let's see.
Maybe. We hope we have that possibility. André, ¿tú quieres comentar algunas últimas palabras para Seb? Dale. André?
Merci beaucoup.
Merci de m'avoir invité, André. À bientôt.
Non, merci beaucoup pour votre présentation. Le sujet est très intéressant pour les plus de gens, pour continuer a apprendre. Vamos a continuar con más temas. Muchas gracias, Sebastián. El tema estaba muy interesante y excelente para las personas en Perú y para las personas que se han conectado del extranjero. Entonces, nada, muchas gracias por tu tiempo. Merci beaucoup pour votre temps. J'essayais avec mon français un peu de un nouveau langue pour moi.
Ça marche.
Así que nada, Carlos, todo excelente, muy bueno, y vamos a seguir compartiendo más conocimiento con toda la comunidad.
Por supuesto, André, ha sido un enorme gusto. It was a great pleasure to have Seb here. So, muchas gracias a todos por estar hoy día sábado temprano. Les agradezco que se hayan conectado temprano. Es difícil la hora, pero ahí estamos para seguir entregando conocimiento a todos ustedes. Y pues disfrútenlo. Disfrútenlo porque, pues, y prepárense porque ahora viene el reinvent y ahí va a haber mucho conocimiento por aprender de nuevo, ¿sí? Siempre es, como dice en AWS, always day one, right?
Yes,
always the way to learn. Exactly.
And I have some good news for reInvent. We will have non-English tracks this year in reInvent. So I don't know if you know that already, but there will be tracks in Spanish, in French, and in 7 other languages in total. So
that was great. I think
we'll have a bit of content in Spanish.
Like 40 tracks, no? 40 tracks in reInvent is like it's insane. I don't know what.
Yeah, there is more than 500 sessions in total. So that's a lot of content.
Of course. Oh, great. I think it's time to say goodbye and enjoy the weekend, Seb. Enjoy the day.
Thank you.
And thank you again for being here.
Thank you. Muchas gracias a todos.
Muchas gracias, Seb. Un abrazo.
Gracias.
Hasta luego. Bye, bye.
Au revoir.
Bueno, André, ¿qué tal? ¿Qué te pareció? Rápido, unos comentarios últimos antes de terminar.
Súper interesante. Espero a todas las personas que estén conectadas y a los que se conecten después en las grabaciones que nos dejen por inbox los temas que quisieran escuchar que quisieran escuchar y que quisieran que le compartamos. Y nada, por último, nuevamente agradecerles a todos, a los que ganaron, que nos escriban por inbox en Twitch para compartirles los créditos. No se olviden de que pueden repostear las ligas de la comunidad para que más gente pueda seguir aprendiendo y así hacer como una bola de nieve, ¿no? Que mucha más gente siga sumando.
Exactamente, eso es lo importante. Cabe resaltar también, antes de acabar, que se viene el reinvent, como habíamos dicho, y no se pueden perder ninguna de las cosas que van a venir. Nosotros vamos a hacer una cobertura especial del reinvent y les esperamos que pues se unan y disfruten, ¿no? Porque el contenido va a ser en inglés, la mayoría en inglés y poquito en español, y nosotros nos vamos a encargar de darles a ustedes la mejor cobertura que se pueda en español y con los updates que necesiten durante las próximas 3 semanas con el equipo de la comunidad de AWS User Group Perú y otras comunidades que van a ir sumándose a esta iniciativa de cobertura, que va a ser complicada, pero estamos ahí para poder apoyarlos, ¿no? Nada, yo creo que esto ha sido por hoy. Andrés, si tú quieres agregar algo más y cerramos aquí.
No, terminamos que se conecten al reinvent, como lo acabas de decir. De hecho, nos vamos a dividir en algunas, ¿cómo le digo? Novedades que den en el reinvent en español. Creo que tú principalmente vas a estar dando los tics del reinvent y quizás algunas personas de la comunidad puedan estar apoyando para sumarse y poder llegar a más gente. De hecho, si algunos gustan apoyar, que nos escriban y podemos coordinar para que también nos apoyen haciendo los tics de reinvent y que no se pierdan en los keynote, ¿no? Que revisen la página de reinvent y el tema que más le interese pueda estar atento en su horario y se puedan programar.
Exactamente. Estamos haciendo varias cosas para el reinvent. Las cosas que mencionaste, André, que es preparar la cobertura, noticias, cómo tomar las noticias de la mejor manera, reacciones a las noticias, updates, y por cierto, pues tratar de ver cómo vamos a a seguir sumando gente para que podamos hacer esta cobertura de manera correcta, ¿no? Cualquiera que les gustaría participar, hago un llamado también a los community builders de Latinoamérica y de Perú y de los países alrededor, que se unan con nosotros a que también podamos seguir empujando el reinvent, ¿sí? Este año es online y vamos a tener que hacerlo con mucha más fuerza, ¿no? Porque antes la gente que vivía en el reinvent se tenía o se guardaba la noticia todo el día hasta que se lanzaba, ¿no? Pero ahora todo el mundo va a saber lo que está pasando realmente. Así que no tienen que desaprovechar la oportunidad de tener un reinvent gratis de 3 semanas todavía. Normalmente solamente es una semana. Esta vez tenemos 3 semanas. Así que prepárense que va a estar muy divertido. Listo.
Correcto, correcto. Gracias a todos los que se han conectado en la mañana de hoy. Y a las personas que han estado en el extranjero también conectadas. Gracias a todos.
Así es. Solamente para terminar, no se olviden, muchachos, ahí suscríbanse a todos los links que ven por acá. Ahí, André, si es que creo que te vemos un poco cortado. Ahí yo me pongo acá. Ahí está.
No, creo que al revés. Me muteas a mí en cámara y te pones a la izquierda.
Sí, bueno. Está bien, está bien.
Vale.
Bueno, sí, ahí están justo todas las redes para que nos puedan seguir. Aquí, por acá también tenemos para que se puedan suscribir a nuestro canal y pues ahí vamos a seguir entregando todo el conocimiento. Muchas gracias a todos y ya nos vemos pronto. Hasta luego.